I'm Brewster, 34 years old, and until recently I was a software engineer living paycheck to paycheck, or so my family thought. Growing up as the middle child, I always got the short end of the stick. When my mom texted about a family dinner, I had no idea they'd announced taking my childhood room away. But as they smiled smugly at me, I held a secret that would change everything. Before I tell you how this family dinner turned into the most satisfying moment of my life, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been the family underdog who finally got their moment to shine. To understand why that dinner was such a pivotal moment, you need to know a bit about my family. I grew up in a modest, two-story home in a middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was in a good school district, which my parents reminded us was their top priority. In our family hierarchy, I was firmly in the middle, sandwiched between my older brother Marcus, now 38, and my younger sister Ashley, 29. Being the middle child is tough in any family, but in ours it came with an extra layer of invisibility. My father, Richard, 62, worked as a manager at a local manufacturing plant. He was the traditional provider, stern but fair with everyone except when it came to Marcus. Dad saw in Marcus everything he wished he had been. Athletic, popular, and charismatic. Every weekend was dedicated to Marcus's football or baseball games, with Dad cheering louder than any other parent. When I showed interest in computers instead of sports, my father would just shake his head and say, "That's nice, but when are you going to get into something real?" My mother, Diane, 60, was a high school English teacher who prided herself on being cultured. She doted on Ashley, her only daughter, taking her to ballet classes, shopping trips, and afternoon teas. Mom and Ashley shared a bond that felt impenetrable, giggling over inside jokes and planning girls' days that I obviously wasn't part of. Mom wasn't unkind to me, just perpetually distracted by her favorite children. The pattern of overlooking my needs started early. When I was 7, my parents converted half of my bedroom into storage space because Marcus needed room for his trophies in his own room. By 10, I had learned not to ask for new clothes until Marcus had outgrown his and passed them down to me. Meanwhile, Ashley's closet was regularly refreshed because girls need more options. The old times my sister mockingly referenced at dinner. That started when I was about 9. Whenever relatives visited, the sleeping arrangements were always the same. Guests got the guest room. Ashley kept her room because a girl needs privacy. Marcus kept his room because he needs rest for sports, and I would sleep on the living room floor. Not the couch, the floor, because the couch was for my grandparents to sit on during the day. This arrangement continued well into my high school years, with everyone acting like it was perfectly normal. School became my refuge. While Marcus was skipping classes to hang out with friends and Ashley was being excused from homework because she had dance recitals, I buried myself in books and computer science. My parents viewed my straight A's as expected rather than praiseworthy. When I won the state coding competition in junior year, my mother simply said, "That's nice, but did you see Ashley made the dance team?" My passion for computers was dismissed as playing around. When I begged for programming books, my father would sigh about wasting money on a phase. Meanwhile, Marcus's sports equipment costs were never questioned, and Ashley's dance costumes, despite being worn once and discarded, were investments in her future. College applications came around, and I received scholarship offers from several tech programs. My parents seemed surprised, as if they hadn't noticed I'd been preparing for this path for years. While they helped Marcus with tuition and co-signed Ashley's student loans, I cobbled together scholarships, grants, and worked 20 hours a week at the campus IT department. Those college years were exhausting but transformative. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who thought like me, who saw value in what I could do. I graduated with honors, but my family barely noticed. Marcus had just been promoted at his sales job, and Ashley had gotten engaged, though that relationship ended 3 months later. At 22, I moved out of my parents' house into a tiny studio apartment that I could barely afford. It was small, with barely enough room for a bed and desk, but it was mine. No one could store their stuff in my space or make me sleep on the floor. Family get-togethers continued to follow the same pattern. Marcus would boast about his sales numbers, Ashley would dominate conversations with dating stories, and I would mention a new project only to have the subject changed. My parents would ask surface-level questions about my computer job, but their eyes would glaze over at my responses. After years of this dynamic, I learned to keep my thoughts, dreams, and eventually my successes to myself. Why share with people who had already decided my place in the family hierarchy? Little did they know I was slowly building a life that would finally make them see me, though not for the reasons they might expect. After college, I landed my first job at a small tech firm developing internal software for businesses. The pay was modest, especially for Chicago, but it was enough to cover my studio apartment rent and student loan payments with a little left over each month. I lived simply cooking most meals at home and taking public transit instead of owning a car. My family assumed this frugality meant I was struggling financially, and I never corrected them. Still in that shoebox apartment, my dad would ask during our infrequent phone calls, "Marcus just put a down payment on a house in the suburbs." What my family didn't see was that I was discovering something valuable about myself at that first job. While my colleagues focused on coding within established parameters, I had a knack for identifying gaps in the market. I could listen to clients describe their workflow problems and envision software solutions they hadn't even thought to request. My boss noticed this talent and started bringing me to client meetings. During one such meeting with a medical supplies distributor, I identified a tracking issue that was costing them thousands in lost inventory. After hours, I developed a small software patch that solved their problem. The client was so impressed they asked if I could create similar solutions for other logistical challenges. That request sparked an idea. While maintaining my day job, I began freelancing nights and weekends, creating specialized software solutions for small to medium-sized businesses that couldn't afford enterprise-level systems. I started with that medical supplier, then used their recommendation to secure 2 more clients. Each project taught me something new and expanded my portfolio. 6 months into my side business, I was making as much freelancing as I was at my full-time job. After a year, I was making double. But I maintained my frugal lifestyle and modest apartment, partly because I was still unsure how sustainable this success would be, and partly because I had a growing vision that required capital. Every family holiday, I'd listen to Marcus boast about his new car, or Ashley complain about her landlord raising her rent, all while my parents beamed at them with pride. Meanwhile, I was quietly reinvesting my earnings, building a client base, and developing proprietary software that could be licensed rather than sold as one-off solutions. By year 2, I had hired 3 other developers to help with the workload. We worked remotely, keeping overhead low. I rented a small office downtown but told my family it was just a co-working space I used occasionally. When they asked about my career, I kept descriptions vague, still in software development or working with some interesting clients, which they took as confirmation that I was merely getting by. The turning point came when a healthcare startup approached me about licensing my inventory management system to deploy across their regional network of clinics. The deal was worth more than my previous annual salary, and it came with a maintenance contract that guaranteed income for 3 years. Within months, 2 similar companies signed comparable deals. I hired more staff, established formal business processes, and consulted with financial advisors about investment strategies. Yet when I visited my parents, I still drove the used Toyota I'd bought after college and wore the same casual clothes I'd always worn. Not because I was playing a role, but because those external trappings just weren't important to me. What was important was the growing dream of having a place that was truly mine. Not just an apartment, but a home with space to breathe, work, and perhaps eventually share with someone special. I began looking at real estate listings, first casually, then with serious intent. For 6 months, I searched for the perfect property. I wanted something with character, space for a home office, good natural light, and a location that would keep my commute to the office reasonable. I looked at modern condos, suburban houses, and urban lofts, but nothing felt right until my realtor called about a newly listed property. It was a restored Victorian in a historic neighborhood with 4 bedrooms, a dedicated office space, a finished basement, perfect for a home gym, and a beautifully landscaped yard. The previous owners had updated all the systems while preserving the original hardwood floors, crown molding, and stained glass windows. When I walked through the front door, I knew immediately this was home. The asking price was substantial more than I'd initially planned to spend, but well within my means given the business's growth. I made an offer the same day, and after some negotiation it was accepted. The closing process took 2 months, during which I told absolutely no one in my family. This moment would be just for me until I decided to share it. The day I signed the final papers and received the keys was surreal. Standing in the empty living room with its 12-foot ceilings and bay windows, I felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with proving anything to my family and everything to do with fulfilling my own vision. That evening, as I sat on the floor of my new home with takeout dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother: "Family catch-up dinner this Saturday at 6. Everyone will be there. Don't be late." I stared at the message, then around at my empty house, and laughed at the timing. Little did they know what was coming. The text from my mother seemed innocent enough. "Family catch-up dinner this Saturday at 6. Everyone will be there. Don't be late." It was typical of her, part invitation, part command, with the clear expectation of compliance. Normally I might have made an excuse. These dinners usually left me feeling like an outsider in my own family, but something about having just closed on my house made me feel different. Perhaps it was time to face them with my new reality. I texted back a simple "I'll be there," which prompted an immediate response from my mother: "Wonderful. I'm making your father's favorite pot roast." Not my favorite, of course, but that was par for the course. As Saturday approached, I found myself oddly calm. The past week had been a whirlwind of meetings with contractors about minor renovations to my new home and finalizing paperwork with my real estate agent. I hadn't even started moving my things yet. The house stood empty, waiting for my vision to fill it. The drive to my parents' house took 45 minutes from my apartment. I'd made this journey countless times, but today the familiar route felt different. I passed the park where Marcus had played baseball, and Dad had rarely missed a game. I drove by the dance studio where Mom had spent hours waiting for Ashley during rehearsals. Then there was the public library where I'd taught myself programming languages while waiting for someone to remember to pick me up. When I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I was struck by how small it seemed now. The 2-story colonial that had once felt so imposing now looked modest. The blue paint was fading slightly, and the shrubs needed trimming. I noticed the basketball hoop over the garage still hung at the perfect height for Marcus installed when I was too short to use it properly. I checked my watch. 5:58. Right on time, but as usual, everyone else was already there. Marcus's oversized SUV took up more than its fair share of the driveway, forcing me to park on the street. Through the living room window, I could see movement and hear laughter. They'd started gathering without me, another small reminder of where I stood in the family order. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to the front door. Before I could knock, it swung open to reveal my mother, wooden spoon in hand. "Brewster, finally. Everyone's been here for ages," she said, leaning in for a quick cheek kiss. "I'm 2 minutes early, Mom," I pointed out gently. She waved away my comment. "Well, come in, come in. Your father's opened a bottle of wine." The living room was crowded. My father occupied his usual recliner, glass of Cabernet in hand. Marcus and his wife Jennifer sat on the couch, their 2 children, Emily and Jacob, playing on tablets at their feet. Ashley was perched on the arm of the sofa, texting rapidly on her phone. "The prodigal son returns," my father announced with what he thought was good humor. "How's that little apartment of yours?" "It's fine," I said, accepting the half-empty glass of wine my mother pressed into my hands. Clearly they'd started drinking well before 6. "Still, in that same place?" "How long has it been now?" 7 years, Marcus asked, not looking up from his own phone. 5, I corrected, though no one seemed to notice. "You should think about buying something," Jennifer chimed in. "Building equity instead of throwing money away on rent. We could recommend our realtor if you'd like." I suppressed a smile. "I'll keep that in mind." Ashley finally looked up from her phone, as if he could afford anything in this market. Those tech jobs don't pay what people think they do. Before I could respond, my mother announced that dinner was ready, saving me from having to decide whether to correct their misconceptions just yet. The dining room had been rearranged since my last visit. The main table was set for the adults, my parents, Marcus and Jennifer. A card table had been set up in the corner for me, Ashley, and Marcus's kids. Some things never changed. At 34, I was still at the kids' table. As we settled in, I noticed other changes to the house. The living room had new furniture and the kitchen had been updated with stainless steel appliances. My parents had clearly been renovating, which made what happened next even more ironic. The conversation during the first part of dinner followed familiar patterns. Marcus dominated, talking about his latest sales achievements and his kids' activities. Jennifer added details about their recent family vacation to Florida. Ashley shared dramatic stories about her job at a marketing firm and her latest dating disasters. My parents asked leading questions to keep them talking while I quietly ate my pot roast. When there was finally a lull in conversation, my father cleared his throat and stood wineglass in hand, looking pointedly at my mother. She nodded encouragingly. "Since we have everyone here," he began, "your mother and I wanted to share some news." I assumed they were going to announce a vacation, or perhaps their retirement plans. Instead, my father's eyes landed directly on me. "Brewster, we've kept your room pretty much the same since you moved out," he said, which wasn't entirely true. Half of it had become storage years ago, and the desk I'd saved up for had been given to Ashley when she needed a study space. "Well," my father continued, "Marcus and Jennifer have been bringing the kids over more often, and with Emily and Jacob getting bigger, they really need more space when they stay over." My mother jumped in, her voice overly cheerful. "So we've all decided that it makes sense to finally renovate your old room into a proper guest room for them. We'll be taking down your old posters and getting a larger bed next week." "It's not like you use it anyway," Marcus added with a shrug. I sat very still, fork suspended halfway to my mouth. They were telling me, not asking me. Not that they needed my permission, it was their house, but the assumption that I wouldn't care spoke volumes. Ashley snickered, twirling her wineglass. "Guess you'll have to sleep on the floor like old times when you visit," she added, referencing those childhood holidays with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. They were all looking at me now, expressions ranging from mild amusement to faint concern that I might actually be upset. They expected disappointment, perhaps even protest. What they didn't expect was the calm that washed over me. My heart was racing and I could feel my fingernails digging into my palms under the table. But alongside the familiar sting of being an afterthought came something new, a sense of perfect timing that was almost comical. I smiled back at them, which clearly wasn't the reaction they had anticipated. "Is that all right?" my mother asked, suddenly uncertain. "Of course," I said lightly. "It's your house." Marcus, perhaps feeling a twinge of guilt, leaned forward. "Hey, we can get you an air mattress for when you visit, one of those nice ones." How generous, I thought. But I kept smiling, wondering how long I should let this moment play out before revealing my own news. The dinner continued with an undercurrent of tension following my parents' announcement. They clearly expected me to show some disappointment about losing my childhood room, and my calm acceptance seemed to unsettle them. "We thought you might be upset," my mother ventured, passing the green beans for the second time. "Why would I be upset?" I asked mildly. "Like Dad said, I don't live here anymore." My father nodded vigorously. "Exactly. And Marcus's family needs the space. They visit every other weekend. The kids love staying with Grandma and Grandpa," Jennifer added, as if justifying the decision further. I glanced at Marcus's children, both absorbed in their tablets, even at the dinner table. They hadn't looked up once during the entire conversation. Plus, Ashley chimed in, "Your room gets the best morning light. It would be wasted just sitting empty most of the time." My room had indeed gotten good light. Not that anyone had cared when I lived there and requested a desk by the window for reading. Back then, my father had insisted the room looked better with the bed under the window, regardless of what I wanted. "We're thinking of painting it a nice neutral color," my mother continued, warming to the subject now that I hadn't made a scene. "Maybe a light gray. And we'll get a queen-sized bed to replace your old twin." "Sounds nice," I said, taking a sip of water. Under the table, my hand tightened around my napkin. It wasn't the room itself that bothered me. It was the familiar pattern of my needs and feelings being an afterthought, if they were thought of at all. "We'll pack up your things," my father added. "Though there's not much left. Just some old books and those computer magazines you used to collect." Those computer magazines had been programming journals that had helped launch my career, but I doubted they'd recognize their value. More likely, they'd end up in the recycling bin without a second thought. Actually, I said I could come by next weekend to get whatever's still there. There's no rush, my mother said dismissively. We won't start the renovations until next month. Marcus is helping us find a contractor. Aren't you, dear? Marcus nodded importantly. I know a guy who did our master bathroom. He's expensive but worth it. The conversation shifted to renovation plans, with everyone offering opinions on paint colors, furniture, and whether the closet should be expanded. No one asked if there was anything in my old room that I might want to keep. In their minds, I had moved on long ago, taking anything of value with me. As they debated the merits of different flooring options, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. It was the same feeling I'd had as a child when my achievements went unacknowledged, or my preferences were overridden. But now, instead of the helplessness that usually accompanied it, I felt something new, a sense of freedom. This room, this house, these dynamics no longer defined me. Will you excuse me for a minute, I asked, standing up from the card table. Need to use the bathroom. No one really acknowledged my departure. As I walked down the hallway, I found myself stopping at the door to my old bedroom. I turned the knob and stepped inside. The room was smaller than I remembered, and indeed much of it had already become storage. Boxes labeled Christmas decorations and Ashley's college things lined one wall. My twin bed remained, but the desk was gone, as were most of the posters that had once decorated the walls. A single bookshelf still held some of my old programming books, and a few science fiction novels I'd loved as a teenager. I ran my finger along the shelf, collecting dust. It had been years since anyone had properly cleaned in here. In the corner sat the old wooden chest where I'd kept my first computer saved from my earnings mowing lawns and shoveling snow. I opened it half, expecting it to be empty, but there it was, the bulky desktop machine that had started everything. Standing in that room, surrounded by the remnants of my childhood relegated to the status of storage, I made a decision. I could reveal my success now, watch their shock, and perhaps deal with the inevitable attempts to rewrite our family history. Or I could let them go on thinking of me as the afterthought child a little longer. I closed the chest, took one last look around the room, and returned to the dining table where the conversation about renovations continued unabated. What about that chest in the corner, my mother was asking. Should we put it in the attic? Just get rid of it, Marcus suggested. It's old and takes up space. We could put a nice dresser there instead. That chest was Grandpa's, I said quietly, sliding back into my seat. He gave it to me for my 10th birthday. There was a moment of awkward silence. Oh, my mother said. I'd forgotten. Well, we can certainly keep it if you want it, though I'm not sure where you'd put it in your apartment. It's fine, I said. Do whatever you think is best. My father, perhaps sensing my resignation, tried to lighten the mood. So, Brewster, anything new with you? Still at that same company. Before I could answer, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was my real estate agent. Perfect timing. Sorry, I need to take this, I said, not moving from the table. It's important. My mother frowned at the breach of dinner table etiquette, but I answered anyway, putting the phone to my ear. Hello, Brewster speaking. Hi, Brewster, it's Sarah from Cornerstone Realty. Just wanted to let you know all the paperwork is finalized for the house. The title transfer is complete and everything's officially recorded. You're all set. I couldn't help the genuine smile that spread across my face. That's fantastic news, Sarah. Thank you for handling everything so smoothly. My pleasure. The keys are ready whenever you want to pick them up, though you already have the set from closing. Congratulations again on your new home. Thanks again. I'll stop by on Monday to get the extra set of keys and drop off that bottle of wine I promised you. I hung up and looked up to find my entire family staring at me with confused expressions. New home, my father asked, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. What was that about? For a moment I considered downplaying it. Old habits die hard. But sitting there at the kids' table in the house where I'd always been an afterthought, something shifted inside me. It was time. Actually, I said calmly, that's what I was going to tell you. I just closed on a house. Silence fell over the table. Ashley was the first to break it. You bought a house, like an actual house. Or do you mean one of those tiny studio condos? An actual house, I confirmed. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, office space, finished basement yard. It's a restored Victorian in Lincoln Park. My mother gasped. Lincoln Park was one of Chicago's most expensive neighborhoods. That's impossible, Marcus said flatly. Those houses go for millions. You work at a tech startup. I took a sip of water, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have. Actually, I own a tech company. I started it about 4 years ago, developing specialized software solutions for healthcare and logistics industries. We've been doing quite well. You own a company, my father repeated incredulously. Since when? Like I said, about 4 years. I kept the day job for the first year until things took off. Now we have 12 employees and clients across the Midwest. But you never said anything, my mother said, her voice faint. I shrugged. No one really asked. Jennifer, always practical, was the first to recover. Well, that's wonderful, Brewster. Congratulations. Thanks, I said. I'm excited about it. The house needs some minor updates, but it's in great shape overall. Original hardwood floors throughout, stained glass windows in the dining room, and a chef's kitchen that was renovated last year. The master suite takes up the entire 3rd floor. I could see my father doing mental calculations, trying to figure out just how successful my business must be for me to afford such a property. Ashley's expression had shifted from skepticism to something closer to jealousy. I don't understand, she said. If you've been so successful, why have you been living in that tiny apartment all this time? I wanted to invest in the business first, I explained, and I was waiting for the right property. Real estate in Chicago isn't something you rush into. Marcus, never one to be outdone, cleared his throat. Well, that's great timing then, he said with forced enthusiasm. With your old room being converted, you'll have plenty of space for us to visit you instead. My mother nodded quickly. Yes, we could come see the new house once you're settled, maybe for Thanksgiving this year. It was remarkable how quickly the dynamic had shifted. Suddenly, my parents were looking at me with something akin to respect, possibly for the first time in my adult life. That would be nice, I said noncommittally, though I'll need some time to furnish the place properly. It's completely empty at the moment. Of course, my father said, reaching for the wine bottle to refill his glass. No rush, but this calls for a toast to Brewster's new house and his company. Glasses were raised and congratulations offered, but I could see the wheels turning behind their eyes. They were reassessing everything they thought they knew about me, recalibrating their understanding of the family hierarchy. As the initial shock wore off, the questions began. How big was the company really? What exactly did my software do? How many bedrooms did the house have again? Was the neighborhood safe? Did I have photos they could see? I answered each query calmly, neither exaggerating nor downplaying my success. I showed them a few photos of the house that the realtor had sent, watching as their eyes widened at the 12-foot ceilings, elaborate woodwork, and spacious rooms that made their house look modest by comparison. This is quite a surprise, my mother finally said, her voice caught between pride and something else, perhaps regret. Life is full of surprises, I replied. Thinking of all the years they'd overlooked me, assumed the least about my potential, and pushed me to the periphery of family considerations. The dinner that had begun with them, smiling, as they took away the last physical space I had in their home, had transformed into something entirely different. Now they sat in stunned silence, contemplating the reality that the son they'd always underestimated had quietly built a life that surpassed their expectations. I didn't feel the vindication I might have imagined. Instead, there was a bittersweet recognition that success hadn't changed who I was to them. It had only changed how they perceived me, and that realization was perhaps the most valuable thing I took from that evening. As the initial shock of my announcement settled, an uncomfortable silence fell over the dining room. My parents exchanged glances, a wordless communication I recognized from childhood, and they were trying to figure out how to respond without losing face. You must be doing very well for yourself, my father finally said, his voice carefully neutral, though I'm finding it hard to believe you've been running a successful business all this time without mentioning it. There was an edge to his words, not quite an accusation, but close. The implication was clear: either I was exaggerating my success now, or I had been deliberately hiding it from them. Neither option reflected well on me in his eyes. "I did mention it," I replied calmly. "Remember when I told you I was developing some custom software solutions for healthcare clients? That was the beginning of it." My mother's brow furrowed. "I thought that was just freelance work, side jobs." "It started that way," I acknowledged. "But it grew." Marcus leaned forward, suddenly interested. "What kind of revenue are we talking about, ballpark?" Of course, that would be his first question. Not what the company did or how hard I'd worked to build it, but how much money it made. "We're privately held," I said, sidestepping the direct question, "but we're stable enough that I felt comfortable investing in real estate." "Brewster has always been modest about his accomplishments," Jennifer said, surprising me with her support. "Remember when he won that coding competition in college and barely mentioned it?" I gave her a grateful look. Jennifer had always been the most perceptive member of the family by marriage, occasionally noticing when I was being overlooked at gatherings. "I still don't understand why you kept all this a secret." Ashley pressed her tone somewhere between hurt and accusatory. "We're family. Families share good news." I considered her words carefully. Did I want to open this door? Once opened, it couldn't be closed again. But looking around at their faces, confused, slightly defensive, and recalibrating their view of me in real time, I decided the truth was long overdue. "Do we?" I asked quietly. "Share good news equally, I mean." "What are you talking about?" "Of course we do," my mother said, but there was uncertainty in her eyes. "Mom, when I made the dean's list every semester in college, it barely warranted a mention at Sunday dinner. When I got that scholarship for my master's program, Dad changed the subject to Marcus's promotion. When I told you I'd started consulting," Ashley interrupted to talk about her new apartment. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We've always been proud of all our children's achievements." "Some achievements more than others," I said. The words weren't bitter, just factual. "That's not fair," Marcus protested. "We've always supported you." "Have you?" I asked, looking him directly in the eye. "When was the last time you asked me about my work, not just, 'How's the job?' but actually showed interest in what I do?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to recall a specific instance. I stopped sharing because it became clear that my successes didn't fit the family narrative, I continued. "In our family story, Marcus is the successful one, Ashley is the creative one, and I'm just the middle child who's okay at computers." My mother's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. "Brewster, that's not how we see you." "Isn't it? When I told you I'd developed a new inventory management system last Christmas, Dad asked if I could fix his printer. It's been like that my whole life." The dinner table fell silent again, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. My father stared into his wineglass while my mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. It was Marcus who finally broke the silence. "So you bought this house, what, to prove us wrong?" I shook my head. "No, Marcus. I bought it because I wanted it, because I've worked hard and been successful, and it's time I had a home that reflects that. Not everything is about this family." Those last words hung in the air, almost shocking in their bluntness. In our family, everything had always been about the family, or rather about the family as my parents defined it, with Marcus and Ashley at the center, and me orbiting the periphery. "I think what your brother is saying," Jennifer interjected gently, "is that he's built a life for himself that we haven't fully appreciated, and that's something we should all think about." My father cleared his throat. "Well, regardless of past miscommunications, this is good news. You've done well for yourself, son, and we're happy for you." The words were right, but they came decades too late to feel entirely genuine. Still, it was a start. My mother, always practical, even in emotional moments, shifted to logistics. "When do you move in? Do you need help? Your father and Marcus could help with the heavy lifting." "I've hired movers," I said, "for next weekend. But thank you for the offer." "Next weekend," Ashley repeated. "That's so soon. You must have been planning this for a while." "The right house doesn't come along every day," I said. "When I found this one, I knew it was time to make a move." My phone buzzed with a text from a business partner about a client meeting on Monday. I glanced at it, then back at my family who were still processing the evening's revelations. I should probably get going, I said, standing up from the card table. I have some work to finish up tonight. But we haven't had dessert, my mother protested weakly. I made apple pie. Rain check, I suggested. I really do need to go. My father stood up as well. Of course you're a busy man. We understand. The walk to the front door felt longer than usual, with my entire family trailing behind me like a bewildered procession. As I reached for my jacket, Marcus approached me. Hey, he said quietly. We should grab lunch sometime. I'd love to hear more about your company. Maybe there's some way I could get involved. Of course. Now that he knew I was successful, he saw an opportunity. Sure, I said non-committally. We'll set something up. My mother hugged me tightly at the door. We really are proud of you, she whispered. I hope you know that. I nodded, not trusting myself to respond without saying something I might regret. As I walked to my car, I heard my parents and siblings talking in hushed voices on the porch behind me. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught snippets. Never would have guessed. All this time. Should we still renovate his room? I smiled to myself as I got into my car. The room didn't matter anymore. I had a whole house now, my house bought with my success designed for my comfort. For the first time, I was defining my own space, rather than accepting whatever scraps of space others allowed me. As I drove away from my childhood home, I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying for years. The burden of seeking validation from people who had never really seen me. Tonight, finally, they had seen a glimpse of who I really was. Not just the quiet middle child, but a successful entrepreneur, a homeowner, someone who had built something valuable on his own terms. The real revelation wasn't about the house or even the business. It was the realization that I no longer needed their approval or understanding. I had found my own path, and it had led me to a place they never expected me to reach. That night I drove not to my apartment, but to my new house. It stood dark and empty, waiting for me to fill it with light and life. I unlocked the front door, stepped into the echoing foyer, and felt a sense of possibility that no family dinner could ever diminish. The days following the dinner revelation brought a flurry of messages from my family that I had never experienced before. My phone, typically silent except for work calls, buzzed constantly with texts from parents and siblings who suddenly had so much to say. My father's message came first, the morning after dinner. Very proud of your accomplishments, son. Would like to learn more about this business of yours. Perhaps lunch next week. In 34 years, I couldn't remember my father ever initiating lunch with just me. It had always been family meals or nothing. My mother's approach was more indirect. Found some of your old computer books while looking through your room. Thought you might want them before we start the renovations. They look important. The same books that had been collecting dust for years, suddenly deemed important now that they connected to my success. Ashley's text was the most transparent. Oh my God, big bro, can't believe you've been holding out on us. Need interior design help with the new place. That's literally what I do at the marketing firm. Space planning. And stuff. I could totally hook you up with our vendors too. Major discounts. I didn't respond immediately to any of them, needing time to process the shift in family dynamics that had occurred overnight. It wasn't that I wanted to punish them, but I needed to establish that my time and attention were valuable, something they'd never seemed to consider before. 3 days after the dinner, Marcus called while I was in a meeting with clients. I let it go to voicemail. Brewster, it's Marcus. Listen, I've been thinking about what you said at dinner, about us not asking about your work. You're right, and I'm sorry about that. Anyway, I had some ideas about your company. Investment opportunities, maybe. Call me back when you get a chance. When I finally returned his call that evening, his enthusiasm was palpable. There you are. Been trying to reach you, he said, as though my unavailability was unusual, rather than our normal pattern of communication. I've been busy with work and moving preparations, I explained. Right. The new house, Jennifer and I were talking about it. We'd love to see it once you're settled. Maybe bring the kids for a weekend. I bet they'd love exploring a house that big. I thought of his children who had barely acknowledged my existence at dinner, now suddenly expected to have the run of my new home. We'll see. It'll be a while before I'm fully set up for guests. Of course, no rush, he said quickly, then cleared his throat. So, about your company. I've been thinking, with my sales background and your technical expertise, we could make a pretty good team. I've got some capital I could invest, maybe come on board in a business development role. There it was, the real reason for his newfound interest in my life. Not to repair our relationship, but to capitalize on my success. That's an interesting thought, I said carefully, but we're not currently looking for investors. The company is doing well with our existing structure. Oh, his disappointment was audible. Well, keep me in mind if that changes. Family business and all that. Family business. As if he'd been supporting my entrepreneurial journey all along instead of dismissing it as playing with computers. The most surprising call came from Jennifer a week after the dinner. Unlike the others, she didn't mention the house or my company right away. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Brewster, she said without preamble. Sorry for what I asked, genuinely confused. For not standing up more when they dismissed your accomplishments over the years. I noticed it, but I never said anything. That was wrong of me. Her sincerity caught me off guard. Thank you for saying that, Jennifer. It means a lot. I remember when you helped Marcus set up our home network and security system when we first bought our house. You spent the whole weekend on it, and he never even offered to pay you. I told him he should, but it's okay, I said. Water under the bridge. Still, she persisted. I want you to know that I see how they've treated you, and it's not right. You deserved better. Of all my family members, Jennifer was the only one offering genuine reflection rather than trying to reposition herself advantageously in light of my success. I appreciate that, Jennifer. Really. And just so you know, she added, I talked to Marcus about his investment idea, told him he was being opportunistic and should focus on rebuilding his relationship with you instead. He didn't take it well. I laughed, despite myself. I can imagine. Anyway, she concluded, congratulations again on the house and the company. You've earned every bit of it. The most awkward encounter came when my parents insisted on dropping off my important belongings from my old room, showing up at my apartment, unannounced the following Saturday morning. We were in the neighborhood, my mother explained, though there was no reason for them to be in my area on a weekend. They carried up 2 medium-sized boxes, huffing from the 3-flight walk-up. This building doesn't have an elevator, my father asked, setting down his box with a thump. No, it doesn't, I said, offering them water. But it won't matter soon. I'm moving next weekend. My mother glanced around the studio apartment that had been my home for 5 years. It was small but neat, with minimal furniture and a desk dominating one corner, my first workspace where the company had begun. I can't believe you've been living like this while running a successful business, she said, her tone suggesting I'd been deliberately deceiving them rather than simply living within my means. It served its purpose, I said. I didn't need more space until now. My father opened one of the boxes, revealing the programming journals I'd mentioned, some old textbooks and a few childhood mementos. Your mother thought you might want these before we clear everything out. Thank you, I said, though I'd already taken anything truly important years ago. So my mother said, settling uninvited onto my desk chair, tell us more about this house of yours. When can we see it? Once I'm moved in and set up, I replied. Probably not for a few weeks at least. Weeks, my father repeated as if I'd said months or years. Surely it won't take that long. Your mother and I could help. We're pretty good at organizing a home. The irony of them offering to organize my new house when they'd never respected my space in theirs wasn't lost on me. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I've got a vision for the place. I want to take my time and do it right. A vision, my mother echoed, smiling as though I'd said something amusing. Well, I suppose everyone has their own ideas about decorating. My father cleared his throat. Your mother and I have been talking about the room situation. Here it comes, I thought. We're thinking maybe we don't need to convert your room right away. It could stay as is for a while longer, just in case. Just in case. What? In case my house and company turned out to be elaborate lies, in case I failed and needed to move back home. The implication stung more than it should have. "That's not necessary," I said firmly. "Go ahead with your plans. Marcus's family needs the space and I won't be needing it anymore." They exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Disappointment, perhaps, that I wasn't more grateful for their belated consideration. "Well, if you're sure," my mother said. I confirmed. After they left, I examined the contents of the boxes. Most of it was destined for donation or storage, but at the bottom of the second box, I found something unexpected, a framed certificate from that state coding competition I'd won in high school. I'd never framed it. My mother must have done so recently, perhaps feeling guilty about dismissing the achievement at the time. It was a small gesture years too late, but it suggested that perhaps my dinner revelation had prompted some genuine reflection. Not enough to fundamentally change our family dynamic, but perhaps enough to plant the seeds of greater understanding. As moving day approached, I found myself fielding more calls and messages from family members. Ashley wanted to know if I needed furniture recommendations. My mother asked about kitchen essentials I might need. Marcus inquired about the neighborhood and property values, still sizing up my success in terms he understood. I responded politely but briefly to each message, maintaining a friendly distance. The pattern of our family interactions was too established to change overnight, and I was wary of their newfound interest in my life. Was it genuine concern, or simply a recalibration now that my status in the family hierarchy had shifted? The most telling moment came during a call with my father, 3 days before my move. "Your mother's wondering about Thanksgiving," he said after some small talk about moving logistics. "Usually we host, but with your new place. Well, she thought maybe you'd want to host this year." I almost laughed out loud. For decades, Thanksgiving had been held at their house with traditions and seating arrangements as firmly established as natural law. My mother's turkey, my father's carving Marcus's toast, Ashley's place settings. The suggestion that I might host represented a seismic shift in family politics. "I don't think I'll be ready to host that soon," I said. "Let's stick with tradition this year." "If you're sure," he said, sounding almost disappointed. "But we'd be happy to come to you." Of course they would, I thought. Now that my house was bigger and more impressive than theirs, they were eager to gather there instead. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I packed up my apartment that week, sorting through possessions accumulated over years of modest living, I reflected on how quickly everything had changed. Not my circumstances, those had been gradually improving for years, but my family's perception of me and my place in their lives. It was a bittersweet realization. The validation I might once have craved now felt hollow, coming as it did only after material proof of my success. Yet there was also a certain freedom in being seen finally as the capable and accomplished person I'd become, despite their limited expectations. The night before moving day, I stood in my empty apartment one last time. This small space had witnessed the birth of my company, late nights of coding, early client calls, the gradual realization of my potential. It had served me well, this humble stepping stone to something greater. Tomorrow I would move into my new home, not as the overlooked middle child seeking approval, but as a successful man who had built something valuable on his own terms. And while my family might never fully understand the journey that had brought me here, that understanding was no longer essential to my sense of self-worth. That perhaps was the most significant change of all. 6 months passed faster than I could have imagined. My Victorian house transformed from an empty shell into a true home that reflected not just my success, but who I really was. I furnished it thoughtfully, room by room, creating spaces that served both function and comfort rather than showcasing wealth. The home office became the heart of the house, a spacious room with built-in bookshelves, large monitors, and a view of the garden where I could watch the seasons change. The kitchen, already beautifully renovated by the previous owners, became a place where I discovered a newfound joy in cooking for myself and occasionally for friends. The guest rooms remained minimalist, but welcoming, ready for visitors I actually wanted to host. My business continued to thrive, expanding into new markets with a growing team of talented developers. The commute from my new home to the office was longer than from my old apartment, but the drive through tree-lined streets gave me time to think and prepare for each day. Family dynamics shifted in subtle but significant ways. My parents called more often, showing interest in aspects of my life they'd previously ignored. Marcus became somewhat competitive, mentioning his own accomplishments and purchases more frequently when we spoke. Ashley oscillated between seeking my advice and making slightly resentful comments about my sudden success. 3 months after moving in, I finally invited my parents to see the house. Their reaction was everything I might have expected. My mother alternated between effusive praise and subtle suggestions for changes, while my father wandered from room to room mentally calculating square footage and property values. "This is quite something, son," he said as we stood in the living room with its 12-foot ceilings and original fireplace. "You really have done well for yourself." "Thank you, Dad," I replied. "It's taken a lot of work to get here." "I suppose we didn't really understand what you were building all those years," my mother added, running her hand along the ornate banister of the main staircase. "You never really explained it to us." I smiled faintly. "I tried to, Mom. Many times." She looked away, perhaps, recognizing the truth in my words. "Well, we're trying to understand now." It was a small acknowledgement, but significant, coming from her. My parents had never been good at admitting when they were wrong, especially to their children. The most healing moment came during a quiet dinner with just my parents at my new home, about 5 months after that fateful family announcement. My mother, after her second glass of wine, brought up the past in a way she never had before. "I think we may have favored Marcus and Ashley when you were growing up," she said, looking down at her plate. "Not intentionally, but it happened." My father shifted uncomfortably but nodded. "Your brother was a lot like me, sports outgoing. I understood him, and Ashley was the baby and the only girl. And I was different, I finished for him." "Yes," he admitted. "You were quieter, always in your own world with those computers. I didn't understand what you were doing, or why it mattered." "We're proud of you now," my mother added quickly. "So proud of what you've accomplished." "I know," I said. "But I want you to understand something. I'm the same person I was before you knew about the house and the company. My worth hasn't changed. Your perception of it has." They were silent for a long moment, absorbing this uncomfortable truth. "You're right," my father finally said. "And I'm sorry it took this to make us see it. It wasn't a complete healing of old wounds, but it was an honest start. We began building a new kind of relationship. Not perfect, still occasionally falling into old patterns, but with a new foundation of mutual respect that had been missing before. Marcus and I established a more distant but cordial relationship. He eventually stopped asking about investment opportunities, and instead began seeking my advice about his own career, which I gave willingly when asked. His children now welcome visitors to my home, showed a surprising interest in coding when I set up a simple programming game for them during one visit. Ashley perhaps had the hardest time adjusting to the new family dynamic. Having always been the baby of the family, she struggled with my elevated status. But even she gradually found her footing, especially after I helped her negotiate a better position at her marketing firm, using some of the business skills I'd developed. As for me, the most profound change wasn't in my living situation, or even my family relationships, but in how I viewed myself. The need for their validation, which had driven so many of my actions and reactions throughout my life, gradually faded. I came to understand that true success isn't measured by square footage or bank balances, but by the integrity with which you live your life and the positive impact you have on others. The house became more than just a symbol of financial achievement. It became a place where I could finally be fully myself without apology or explanation. A place where I invited friends who valued me long before I had material success. A place where I could work on projects that fulfilled me intellectually and creatively, not just financially. The most important lessons I learned through this journey weren't about proving others wrong, though there was admittedly some satisfaction in that. They were about proving myself right, about trusting my own path even when others couldn't see its value, about the power of quiet persistence over flashy demonstrations. Financial freedom provided choices, not happiness itself. The happiness came from using those choices wisely, to create a meaningful life on my terms, to help others when I could, to set healthy boundaries when necessary. The old childhood pattern, sleeping on the floor while others took the beds, had taught me something valuable after all. Sometimes you have to experience discomfort and inequality to fully appreciate the home you eventually build for yourself, literally and figuratively. The final piece fell into place when I hosted a small dinner party for friends who had supported me through years of hard work and uncertainty. As we sat around my dining room table laughing and sharing stories, I realized that the true measure of success wasn't the admiration of family who had underestimated me, but the authentic connections I'd formed with people who saw my value all along. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Sometimes the sweetest success is the kind no one sees coming, not even your own family. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of unexpected triumph. And remember, the best revenge isn't showing others they were wrong about you. It's proving to yourself that you were right about you all along. Thank you for listening, and I wish you all the success and recognition you truly deserve.